have a confession to make. I am terrified of octopuses.
We'll go with vampire. That'll be safer.
I think what I have learned is that I enjoy vampires when they're gay.
Octopus fact time.
Octopus facts!
I mean, that's what we do on this podcast. We just make stuff up with a good argument.
We are the octopus, and the octopus is us.
In the face of horror, we often default to being normal about it.
I mean, how many times have either of us watched a film or something and identified with the monster?
Is it spooky? Is there a castle? Did a woman faint? Ah, it must be gothic.
Metaphors and pretty sentences and a giant monster at the end.
Welcome to The Vampire and the Octopus,
a series by Book Club with Julia
and Victoria.
Two women who have spent what feels like forever being almost 30, even though we're still only 28.
It's so close yet so far.
So far. I feel like we've been talking about it being in our late 20s the entire time we've made this podcast. And it's
I think the moment I turned 25 and a half, I'm barely in my 20s anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd like to be your book friends. And this is a podcast for the books we just can't shut up about.
So this week, we're reading the first of our octopus books. It's called Sea Change by Gina Chung. I think there's some argument whether this is literary fiction or magical realism or where this kind of falls. But I would say it's literary fiction in terms of style set slightly in the future, maybe 3 years. In which a Korean-American woman named Ro, who works at an aquarium caring for a giant Pacific octopus, must cope with changes in her life and relationships after her boyfriend decides to join the first settlement mission to Mars. This sounds like a sci-fi premise, and yet it's not. We'll get into it.
There will be spoilers ahead, so if you are someone who really cares about reading the book before you hear how it all ends, hit pause, come back, we'll still be here. But whether you've read or not, you are welcome to join in the discussion.
Yeah. As always, we would love for you to rate, review, subscribe, wherever you are listening to this right now. We love getting feedback. If you go down into any book links in our show notes, anywhere, that will take you to our affiliate page on bookshop.org, where we get a very small kickback if you buy books on there. It also has all of our book lists. We have a couple curated lists, and then every single book that we've ever done on the show ever in our lives is also there. So if there's ever a book you can't find, it's there. And if you want to join our Buy Me a Coffee page, buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv, we did a ton of research for this series, and only a fraction of it is making it into the show. So we're going to be putting together bonus content for our book club members on the things that didn't make it. That'll be sort of releasing alongside these episodes. So I think for this one, I'll probably talk about a couple of the books that I will be referencing that didn't make it into the book list for the show, but that I highly recommend and will be my recommendation.
So, Julia, this is the first of the octopus books that you have brought to the table. What was your experience reading, and at what point were you like, yes, this will be a key part of our syllabus?
Yeah.
For The Vampire and the Octopus.
Yeah, it was funny. This book kind of crept up on me. I had been kind of disappointed with a slew of octopus books. There's a lot of garbage out there, guys. So I was reading this book because you had seen you sent me a picture of it. You hadn't read it at all. You just saw it in a bookstore. And you were like, here's one.
This is the origin of The Vampire and the Octopus. I was standing in a bookstore in Indianapolis, and I had picked up a book that had a vampire trope, and I saw this book nearby, and I was like, what if we, crazy idea, only read one or two topics for the next 6 months? And you were game. But I had sent you a picture. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but literally has an octopus on the cover. I have no clue what this book is.
This is part of the origin story. But I took a while reading it because it took me a while to get it from the library. It wasn't like I immediately fell in love with it or anything. But it also didn't feel like a struggle. It didn't feel hard to keep reading for me. It felt I was just vibing. And I didn't realize how much I connected to the story until the very end, the final kind of big conversation that Ro has with her friend. And they kind of apologize to each other and talk about what's been going on and stuff with both of them and admit that they're both having a hard time. And I got so emotional. And this was my note on the day. It said, BRB crying over the weird lifelong friendship of two girls who met when they were kids. It was about the friendship all along. Yeah, it kind of took me by surprise how much I really cared. Because there's so little that, like, happens in the book. You know what I mean? Very little time passes. It's, like, just kind of a woman existing in difficult circumstances. But I think this novel really just hits for people in their late 20s for a variety of reasons. Even though, like, a lot of the specifics of her life are very different from mine, I think a lot of the feelings were very relatable, and I think the author did a really incredible job of capturing them. And I thought what she was doing with the octopus was not necessarily totally unique, but I thought she did them the best of any of the fiction that I had read so far. I just thought it was very seamless and effortless, and that the octopus really did add something to the story. It wasn't like a gimmick or like didn't feel out of place. It just really felt like, oh yes, this is the best way to sort of embody the themes of the book. How about you? You read it much more recently, so there might actually be details that you remember better than me.
I had a similar experience to you where I was like, wow, I relate to this book so much. But on the surface, like, absolutely nothing of my life looks like this person. You know, I'm not a child of immigrants. I am not living in a parallel future where my boyfriend goes to Mars. I'm not like working in an aquarium. I'm actually most driven in my career life more than other aspects of my life. But there was something so relatable about just the experience of going through change, of being alone, like lonely in your adulthood. Especially the beginning of the book, there's a lot of like anxiety and depression as like the tone of the book. So like the way that the vibes, if you will. And it was so well executed by the author, meaning I felt anxious and depressed while reading it at times. No. And so I just had to pace myself and read at times when I felt very grounded. But like if I had a kind of like, day where I'm like, man, I'm new to this city. I'm like trying to make friends here. Reading a book about a woman who is like absolutely struggling to have friendship in her life was not always the most enjoyable. But once I got further into the book, maybe it was also just like a better week for me. I really enjoyed it in like long sittings. I don't know if it's, again, how I was feeling last week or just the way the book sits for me, that like I want to go sit with it for a while. Like I want to go sit at my own table at the wine bar and nurse a glass of wine for 2 hours and read my book. I want to go to the park on a blustery day and be like anonymous in the crowd and read my book. And so this was one of those for me. And for such a depressing start, it ends on such a hopeful note. And like you said, so well executed in like not going too big, but also not staying too small in its, you know, discussions of sea creatures and like the aquarium life, but also in like her personal life and the emotional arc of the book. So I kind of found myself in like a really nice reading pause after I finished it. Like I'm glad I read my vampire books already for the show, or I'd be a little stressed because I'm like, I can't pick up a new book. I'm still like holding on to the like ending of Sea Change. I'm not ready to like dive into a new world yet. So overall, really enjoyed it. I've already been recommending it to people. I felt silly because for listeners who don't know, I work with a publishing, like a literary journal. And I was like, man, Gina Chung would be really great for a journal. And I go look at her website. Sure enough, we've already published her. One of her short stories. It was the issue before I joined the staff. So I've read it. I just did not remember it was her.
Yeah, I do feel like I did finish it and immediately recommend it to a friend and decide like we're definitely doing this book for the show. But I did have to give like a trigger warning. Like you'll really enjoy the book, but it will hit close to home in to different degrees depending on how similar your life is to the main character. So yeah. This is a very new author, right? This is her debut novel. So there's not a lot about her on the internet yet. So tell us what you found.
Gina Chung was born in Queens, and she moved to the New Jersey suburbs when she was 3. She describes in an interview with Electric Lit that she grew up in a very small, very white town, but was very well connected through her family and friends in the Korean American New Jersey scene. She's the child of immigrant parents, and so for her, She's kind of straddling this line similar to Ro as far as being in a very white space a lot of the time, but also having a lot of ties within the Korean American church-going families and the culture around her. Gina Chung eventually went to get a BA in Literary Studies from Williams College up in Massachusetts. She has an MFA in fiction from the New School, and she started getting some attention and traction on her short stories. She received multiple awards, including the Pushcart Prize for her story Mantis. And Mantis is actually included in her new collection that just came out March 2024, Green Frog. She currently lives in Brooklyn, and like you mentioned, Sea Change is her debut novel. She wrote the first draft of it in fall of 2020, if that helps you ground in the emotions throughout this book, and it came out in 2023.
We'll get more into the intersection of the octopus and the pandemic in a different episode. But that tone is always here with us throughout this entire series. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail in the summary because the structure of the novel is pretty simple. The content of the novel is pretty simple. So we'll get into some of the character things in the discussion. Basically, Ro, her English name is Aurora and her Korean name is Arim, but we're going to call her Ro because I think that's how she thinks of herself.
Everyone but her parents call her Ro in the book too.
So she's our main character and narrator. She's feeling stuck. Her boyfriend left her because he was chosen to join the first settlement mission to Mars.
No big deal.
No big deal. And then at the beginning of the novel, sort of the inciting incident in a way, is that she learns that the giant Pacific octopus named Dolores, who she's been taking care of at the aquarium where she works, is going to be sold to some super rich dickhead guy. We just assume he's a dickhead because he's buying an octopus.
For, like, his home.
So, this octopus was something very special to her. Her father's the one who found this octopus in this region called the Bering Vortex. So, it's no longer the Bering Strait, it's the Bering Vortex. And it's, like, I imagine it's, like, whatever you picture in your mind that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch actually looks like in your mind, I imagine that's how she describes it. Not how the Great Pacific Garbage Patch actually is, which is just, like, a high density of microplastics. But, like, you know, we all imagine it as like an island you can walk on of garbage. I think that's more how she describes it. And also a bunch of chemical waste as well.
It's interesting how we all have different pictures of it because
really?
I hear vortex and I'm thinking like whirlpool situation that like a la the McDonald's movie that I had on VHS where they get the ship gets sucked down the, what do you call
Charybdis.
it? That everything's just like tossed around in the like polluted wasteland, and the octopus Dolores is just like flowing through and like drinking up all the chemicals and becoming this like big beefy basically immortal octopus.
That's a good point. She does call it
it's
a vortex.
Very purple for some reason in my mind.
Yeah, I think because of the cover. Anyway, so her father went on a mission to the Bering Vortex and brought back Dolores and introduced Ro to this octopus. And then her father disappeared when she was a teenager, right? So this octopus is like the thing she has of her father. The octopus sale is also causing a rift between Ro and her childhood friend Yoonhee, who works in the development department of the aquarium. And she's just trying to keep the aquarium open. It's not doing so great. And she's like, we could sell the octopus to this rich guy for a lot of money and keep the aquarium open and also keep Ro's job. That's something we learn later as well. So they're fighting about it. And of course, it's not just about the octopus. It's about like a million other things below the surface. So a lot of the story is told in flashback. And like for the 3/4 of the book, it sort of alternates between present day and past tense, present day flashback. And so we get the backstory on how Ro and Yoonhee became friends. They're kind of an unlikely pair, you know, their personalities are very different. But it was just like they were the only people they had. How Ro met her boyfriend Tae at a party. They also were kind of an unlikely pair, but they just like really clicked. They really supported each other well. But they just had very different senses of like their long-term purpose. And also what it was like growing up with her parents constantly fighting and her dad eventually leaving. And we get a bit of her parents' backstory as well later on.
His ship gets lost in the vortex.
Yeah.
He doesn't, not leaving as in he walks out on the family. It's like he goes off on another mission and the ship sinks. So it's like, I think a bit different than like her dad is still alive but no longer in her life versus her dad is dead, but she takes a long time to accept that he's actually gone. I don't know. How did you read it?
I don't know if this was like the way it was described and presented to us through this unreliable narrator, but my interpretation was always that he like left them for the other girl and just didn't say anything. But I guess that doesn't really make any sense.
Well, because I actually wrote, because I do think this is an interesting point, because Ro is unreliable at times. She spends so much of her life wishing he was around, kind of not believing that he's gone. Doesn't really have an idea of where he would be, except like in the ocean, which is like unrealistic, and she recognizes that. But, you know, like her recollection is she's like, oh, I remember my mom being like happier when he first left on the mission. And I literally wrote my notes, I'm like, oh my gosh, is this going to be one of those things where like he's not actually dead, but the mom was like, you got to leave, come up with a story. But then we get another flashback of when her dad died. It was a noteworthy news event. And so the whole ship was lost, everyone on it. She like haunts these basically like Reddit or like other forums where conspiracy theorists talk about like what actually happened, because it's a pretty mysterious disappearance of the ship, but it's like almost like a coping mechanism for her.
Right.
Then like she recognized it as conspiracy, as like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I do hear you on, like, there was a bit of the book where I was like, I don't think he's actually dead.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh no, he's really dead.
Okay. So I guess what has stuck around with me is not the part where it was like, yeah, no, he's definitely dead. It was the like, I think I spent much more of the book being very convinced that he had left them for another woman. And so that's what remained in my memory.
Because he did have, like, we don't know how big of an affair, but, like, definitely some sort of connection with this other woman that he was keeping hidden from his family, which is suspicious.
And I also think, because didn't her mom ask him not to go the second time for the second mission? But he was so determined to go back. And that woman was also going to be there. And so I think my brain was like, well, regardless of the outcome of how he actually disappeared, it was very much like his choice. He considered Trip and this project and this relationship with this other woman to be more important.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the difficulty too, right? Is like, she is mourning the loss of her dad, but also like all of the closure they're missing. You know, like,
yes,
we don't get to know if her parents ever would have worked things out better, or if he would have changed, or if she would have changed, and like and she references, Ro talks about like all the things she never got to tell her dad, or to talk to her dad, or think to ask him, and now just has to like guess at what he would say. So it is really interesting, because I'm curious for those who have lost a parent, especially a father, whether through death or through like separation, like how this reads, if it's like relatable in both cases.
Yeah. And also, like, a lot of the book, it kind of feels like her dealing with, as we get more information about her father, we sort of get a sense of, like, oh, he was not a great person or father. As difficult as it is for her to connect with her mom, you can kind of understand why her mom is the way she is. So anyway, throughout the book, we see Ro trying to cope with change and learning to invest in her relationships. One of the plots is like her learning to connect better with her cousin Rachel and her cousin Rachel's daughter, who's also going through a lot of tumultuous relationship things and change. And by the end of the book, we see Ro sort of taking the very first steps towards being happy and taking care of herself. We don't see the full fulfillment of that. It's more like she's finally making those sea changes. I think that's everything you need to know. We wanted to focus on the loneliness of change. That feels like the sort of core of this book. The title is Sea Change. So many of the characters are dealing with change and dealing with loneliness and trying to navigate relationships in the midst of all that. And so this sort of raises the question, like, you know, why an octopus to talk about this overarching theme? It may seem kind of funny because we spent that whole introductory episode talking about the octopus as a monster in fiction, and then we start with this book where the octopus isn't really a monster at all. It's slightly exaggerated from reality. It's really big and it's lived a really long time. So it has slight mythical qualities to it or unreal qualities to it, but it's otherwise a perfectly normal, sweet little octopus who seems to have a good sense of character because she squirts the guy in the face who is trying to buy her. That's very fun. But yeah, so that, you know, this might seem like kind of a, like, why are we starting with this book? But I wanted to start here because to me, this book sort of speaks to the fascination and connection that humans always seem to be able to have with the octopus, despite how inscrutable or quote-unquote monstrous it may appear to us. It's a very, like, we always get reeled back in. You know, like throughout thousands of years, right? There's so many octopus stories that we just can't stop talking about it. And yes, we're going through a kind of a resurgence at the moment, but it's not a new phenomenon.
One thing I didn't really fully notice until I read an interview with Gina Chung is that the book doesn't really have any villains or like pure antagonists. And so it made me think when you talk about like the octopus as inscrutable, that the book really focuses on like the nuance of the individual and the nuance of every relationship. So like in the way that an octopus is complex and there's so much we don't know about an octopus, we have all these individuals in the novel that Ro doesn't fully understand, and they don't understand her fully, and everyone's nuance, even the people who like make decisions we would disagree with, like have understandable motives, and we can come to sympathize with them as we uncover more layers. And you and I were talking as we were prepping this episode, is like, you start the book and there's a lot of people you don't like.
Yeah.
You read it and you're like, I'm on Ro's side, everyone sucks. But as you get into the flashbacks and the stories and like what experiences shaped each of these characters, we're like, I don't think your mom's that bad. I don't think your best friend is like that terrible. I think maybe they made choices that hurt you, but you've also made choices that might have hurt them. And like the layers and the complexity is very interesting to then bring an octopus into the equation to be a part of that nuanced approach of like, is the octopus like friendly and humanistic in some ways? And Ro reminds the reader, like, I don't know what this octopus is thinking. Dolores is her name, but like, does she even care that I'm gone? Like, does she know that I'm leaving? Does she care? Does it matter if she does?
Yeah, because it's like, there's a lot of self-awareness in the story that like we project a lot onto a sea creature, you know, like an octopus. But like, you know, what is it that people connect to in an octopus on a personal level that makes them want to write contemplative books about it? Like, this has inspired a lot of literature, you know? And we see some patterns in how the octopus is used to talk about very kind of close and personal experiences and feelings, and often very difficult feelings. We don't normally use the octopus to talk about like easy breezy fun times feelings. We use the octopus to talk about really difficult things. The books that I've read that are much more personal and close, you know, in scope, both fiction and nonfiction, there generally seems to be two themes that come up a lot that people sort of relate to the octopus about and use the octopus to kind of project and examine these things that they're experiencing. So the first one is like change and adaptation. The octopus's entire nature, or their entire nature is like change and adaptation, right? They communicate and express themselves through changing colors and shapes and like responding to the light in really, really complex ways. And they have no fixed form. And they're incredibly adaptive because the world is so dangerous for them. And so they have to be so smart in order to survive. Because they're just these little squish blobs who have to survive really harsh environments. So they got to be crafty, right? So I think a good example of an examination of this theme is one of the essays from Sabrina Embler's How Far the Light Reaches, which is like an part memoir, part essay collection. It uses the octopus and cuttlefish, actually both, there's one on each, to talk about transitions in life, particularly relationship to gender and the things about the self that are never fully fixed, and the kind of the tumultuous nature of being a body in some ways, and how the body's always changing, and your sense of self is always changing, and that kind of stuff. And the other one that people seem to come back to time and time again is feeling of loneliness and isolation. The octopus is a very solitary creature who is nonetheless very bright and enigmatic and social, capable of being very social and connecting with people. And yet their lives are so short that they can't really build any kind of society or close bonds. And they're always in danger. And so they have to just be constantly protecting themselves and keeping their safest alone. And then they die to create more of their species. And so they just never really have any sense of community, even though they're so smart. And so I think also there's an element of how different they are from people that also people latch onto, people who are lonely and feel very different from the people around them. Why a lot of autistic folks latch onto them, right? Because they're recognized as kind of an alternative intelligence, where it's like you can relate to the isolation of being the only one like you around and like feeling different from the people around you. And I think there's a book that is actually quite similar to Imbler's How Far the Light Reaches. It's called World of Wonders, and again, it's part memoir, part essay collection. The her name is Amy Nezukumatatl. She has a squid story and an octopus story, and both of them kind of contemplate isolation. She talks about going through a vampire squid phase where she's sort of feeling alone and outside the rest of the world and just different from everyone around her. She moved around a lot when she was young. And I think you could argue change and isolation are some big themes of what's going on currently in the world right now. But clearly we've connected to the octopus for thousands of years, right? It's there's something about now that draws us to them, but there's always been something. Like maybe the octopus understands how it feels to not be a perfect person, or to be isolated by your circumstances, or to be tossed by the constant ebb and flow of a harsh environment and like still learn how to connect with strangers and still learn how to survive and stuff. They probably don't literally understand and empathize with those feelings, but we see those qualities and we feel like it's a way we can express them in ourselves. So with this book, we're going to be looking at those two themes, change and isolation, and how the author kind of uses the octopus to emphasize these feelings for the main character and the reader.
Yeah, so the novel really starts with like just a whole background of change, right? So we're like in this, I read an interview I've referenced a few times, it's in Electric Lit, and they refer to the novel as, quote, taking place in a sort of parallel future. So like you said, it's like maybe like 3 years in the future in a slightly alternative reality of Earth. But we're dealing with climate change, and like the whole, I think what helps build kind of this tone of anxiety is that we're just like getting little references to how much climate change has impacted Rose's life with just like the way she comments on the weather, or, you know, remembering something. It's like, oh, we had snow back then every winter.
Yeah.
And it gives kind of this like sense of like everything's changing and what do we do about it? But also it's really in the background. I mean, the most we get it in the foreground is when Tay, her boyfriend, is like, I'm leaving. This is our chance. Like, this is humanity's chance at something else. When she's like, but why would you leave me? Yeah. And he's like thinking on this like mega humanity scale, like this is like literally the once in a lifetime opportunity for him to be a part of this larger purpose. And that's where they kind of come to odds.
It's interesting how I feel like the book on a narrative level deals with climate change the way that Ro deals with it. Partially because Ro is the narrator. But it's basically be like, that's too big and scary. That's too much change for me to fully process. And so I'm just not going to. But it's still there. It's kind of always sitting there in your subconscious, just like, and anytime you forget, the author will throw in a little nugget of like, oh yeah, remember when it used to snow when you were a kid? And you're just like, oh my god, yeah, I forgot. I mean, just on a very basic level, that felt very relatable of like, this is such a large scale problem that I do not, as one tiny human, have the capacity to deal with. And I have to continue living my life and paying my bills. and just like, you know, like we can feel the weather changing around us and it does impact our day-to-day life. And, you know, we got to be thinking on that bigger scale. And also, I am a single solitary person. You know, she does a great job of just like turning up the dial just a tiny bit. It's not like a totally different world. She just like turns the dial a little bit in order to kind of highlight those feelings a little bit more, I think.
But alongside this like idea of climate change and kind of like the impending doom, there's also the idea of like adaptability, right? So like I think often when we talk about the loss of life with climate change, especially with animal life, it's like, oh, we're like species are going extinct, which is true. And it's not like not a part of the novel, but so much more than that is Dolores the octopus as like extremely adaptable. Like she's an anomaly because she's due to the hostile environment of the Bering Vortex and the place she's from. Like that's why Dolores kind of gets plucked out to be studied and researched by Roe's father. And in similar way, we have Roe, I was talking with a psychologist recently and we were talking about the terms maladaptive and adaptive coping behaviors, which are just like really fancy words to say like things that are more helpful or less helpful. Like my psychologist friend would disagree with me saying helpful and unhelpful, but like maladaptive can be the most helpful thing in the moment. Like that's the thing that helped you survive. And so we see Roe, who's like, as an adult, has some coping behaviors like alcohol and pushing people away, like expecting people to leave that seem maladaptive, that seem really unhelpful for her. But as we get to see more of her childhood, we can see like, that was how you survived. Like, that's how you mentally made it through the traumas of your youth. Like, she's also had to be, like, extremely adaptable. So you have both her and Dolores who are, like, not coming from, like, positive adaptability. Not like, oh, you had so much good going for you that it made you flexible. It was like you were in a really terrible situation and you adapted as best you could. But what do you do now? So for Roe, it's like, do you take these, what might be called maladaptive coping behaviors, and keep them, but it seems to not be working anymore. And that's kind of like the sea change, if you will, of her life is finding different ways to either move through some of the emotions or to cope better when faced with the difficulties of boyfriends going to Mars and other things, losing a job or, you know, leaving a job and stuff like that.
Yeah, she had this quote that I connected to very strongly. It's sort of talking about, like, in a roundabout way, Roe's difficulty with coping with other people changing, right? So it's not just like there's this background of change and the very difficult ways that Roe has had to change or adapt in order to survive change. And now she's an adult and she's like, please, can everyone stop changing now? Can everyone stay exactly the same? So she describes it like this, quote, "Everyone always seemed to be climbing upwards and striving for more all the time. And it wasn't like I didn't want any of those things for myself. It was more like I wouldn't have had any idea what to do with them had they come to me. I wanted, if I was being honest, to slow down just for a little while. Everything felt like a race for which there wasn't even a definite prize, and that didn't seem to end until you died." And I was like, oh, baby. Oh, man. You know, she's almost 30. Everyone in her life seems to be in transitional points. Her boyfriend moving to Mars. Her best friend Yoonhee is getting married. So that's a big sort of transitional moment in life, a big milestone. And then she also finds out that her sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back, if you will, in her emotional journey is she finds out her mom has started dating someone else, this guy from her church, who just seems like the sweetest little old man. And so it's like, you know, she had such massive change as a teenager. And so now she's like trying to find stability, but it seems like people are continuing to change without her and are continuing to chase these things. And she's like, why can't we all just like slow down for a second? Can we just stay here for a little bit?
We also have her cousin Rachel, who's kind of going through what you pointed out is kind of like a parallel to Roe, where Rachel has separated from her husband after he abused her. Rachel's having a difficult time like finalizing the ending
Yeah.
and kind of like leaving hope that maybe they'll get back together. She's resisting it, even though she knows it's the best. But it also leaves her daughter, who's 5, Haley, in like a difficult situation. So Haley, you know, who's a 5-year-old, is trying to like grapple with the emotions of her parents not being together, is like acting out in school and like pushing kids on the playground. And maybe similar to Ro, Rachel's kind of like resisting the change, even if she knows like something needs to change. And not really being honest with Haley, you know, like letting Haley think that there's an opportunity for them to get back together when it's like, that door's got to close. Haley needs some closure. Because we see Ro kind of in this bit where she's kind of getting pressure from other people, or she perceives pressure to like move on or fix things or have something more in her life. She feels like she's disappointing other people, and very much like in that stuck place when we meet her at the beginning of the novel.
And I feel like something that Rachel's storyline allows us to do is like, it sort of calls into question Ro as a narrator, right? Because she has kind of an outsider perspective on Rachel's experience, where she's like, Rachel, you need to leave this guy. You need to move on. Then we sort of look at Ro and are like, okay, is it the same for you? Do you also need to move on? Do you need to embrace the change in your life? And maybe it's not everyone else's fault as quite as much as you're making us think, right? It just gives a little crack in her narrative where we get to sort of see outside of her for a second and be like, what is the full context of the situation that we find Ro in? But it takes us a while to get there, because so much of how the book is written is, you know, we're stuck in Ro's perspective. And Ro is constantly trying to get away from the change and get away from the problems and avoid it as much as possible. And one of the ways she does that is through her job. Caring for the octopus. You made a comment when we see her introducing Dolores to the guy who wants to buy her, where you were like, oh, she's like actually really good at her job.
Well, yeah, and I think she has that realization too. Like, Ro as a narrator is kind of like feeling kind of good and like kind of proud that Yoonhee is there to see it, of like, yeah, I'm good at my job and like I know things. And, you know, she was really distraught emotionally about, you know, Dolores being bought by someone else, and she really wanted to hate this guy. And while he's like not great and ultimately like backs away from the deal because he's like in over his head, which I think is actually a reasonable thing for him to say. I don't think anyone should have a giant Pacific octopus in their home, but he's actually kind of interested and like really listens to her, and like, you know, he has a bit of an ego, but like takes her really seriously, because he at that point in the story is going to have this octopus in his home, so he like needs to learn everything he can from her. So yeah, all these years that she has felt maybe languishing in this job, I think she's been working there for 8 years, you know, she feels like she's disappointing her mom, and she's like letting herself just kind of stay stuck, even when other people are like, well, if you don't like it, move on. She's like, what would I do? It's kind of a moment for her to be like, oh, okay, like I have done something with the 8 years here. I know these creatures. I know this octopus. And I wonder too if that kind of confidence boost helps with her eventually deciding to leave the job. Kind of like, I am capable.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I was thinking of it more as like, that's probably the reason why she stays, is it's the only place where she feels knowledgeable or good at something. Even if she doesn't like how they treat her and it's kind of boring day to day and she's not going anywhere. It's something that she knows how to talk about. But yeah, I guess that moment of showing off in a way proves to herself that that is true, actually. She makes this point about how she finds sea creatures easier to deal with than people. Like, and if you think about it, like, as a device, Dolores stays the same for, like, a good chunk of Ro's life, which is not true of most octopus, right? Most octopus live, like, 3 years.
Yeah, this is the fantastical element of...
This is the fantastical element. The octopus shows up when she's a child, and it's sort of a constant throughout her life, and then she works with Dolores for 8 years as an adult, right? So that's a long chunk of time that Dolores has been around. And so that's like one constant in her life that actually doesn't change. And so she makes this comment of like fish, sea mammals, crustaceans, cephalopods, mollusks, penguins. All of them were so much less demanding, easier to understand than the shifting currents and tides of other people and of my own mind. So it sort of shows you her mindset, right? Of like, she thinks it's easier to stay here where at least she does know something and there's something that she is familiar with. It's been around for a long time. Instead of actually figuring out what she wants, she's going to need to change alongside to follow the currents, so to speak, kind of change alongside what's happening to her.
I really liked this quote from the author about change, saying, one of the ways that we cope with change is to expand and grow alongside whatever is happening to us, sometimes without even realizing it. And I think one thing I really enjoy about the novel is that there isn't this like rock bottom necessarily. There isn't like one pivotal moment where like Ro decides to change everything, and she does have some dramatic moments. Like in one day she like quits her job and Yoonhee comes over and they like reconnect as friends. Those are kind of tied because Yoonhee's like, you didn't even tell me you were quitting. But otherwise it's kind of that Ro's character, we're getting all these flashbacks to build context, but in the present day there isn't really a lot happening. But she is expanding and growing alongside what's happening. And that is Dolores might be sold. And it kind of raises the idea of what would she do? Like, could she do anything else? I think all those subtle shifts happen so that she can make those big steps and decide, you know what, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to figure it out. In the same way, I think it's really beautiful how she is kind of encouraged by her cousin of like, if you want to talk with your mom, you have to open up to talk to your mom. And so her first step is like to make a cake and then just like show up. And like, we don't get like entire reconciliation in this moment, but it's like starting to expand and grow as things change. As her mom explore a new romantic relationship, Ro has to learn how to grow and change alongside that.
Yeah, if you want change in your relationships, like, you have to be there for it. Do you have any stories about the grief of change? Long-term relationships? I feel like we both really connected to the friendship piece of this story the most.
Yeah, I think, well, I thought of two things. So I think in general, friendship grief is something we don't really talk about enough in our society. Like, I realized that I didn't fully process like the grief of a quote, like friendship breakup that I went through until I was listening to a different friend tell me about a similar experience that she was going through. And I was like, oh, I understand the grief you're feeling and like how hard this feels and the kind of finality of it that kind of creeps out of nowhere, it feels like, or creeps up over a long time. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that was the end. And we have so many like cultural touchstones. And I've been reflecting a lot lately on how we build ritual in our lives. And I think our media and our storytelling and how we talk with our friends and our family, we build so much ritual around the romantic breakup. Like, I'm showing up with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues. I'm bringing the ice cream and the chocolates. I'm taking you on a vacation. We're going to get your mind off of her or mind off of him or them. And these are the rituals we will do. We will like light candles and have bonfires and like release things. And we don't have those necessarily around the grief of the end of a friendship, especially because they tend to be less explosive and more dwindled to nothing in most cases, or no one even acknowledges it's the end. You just know like that's probably the last time I'm going to see her. But we don't get that in this book. What we do get, what we think could be the end of a friendship, but is really the beginning of them coming back together. This is something that you and I talked a little bit about, as far as like sometimes childhood friends are like not at all the people that in your adult life you're going to go meet and become friends with, but they're so special in their own ways. Do you have any like childhood friend stories like that are like if people met you individually would not expect you to be friends?
Dude, one of my oldest friendships who like anytime I'm in Bakersfield, we still meet up like every time. And it's like nothing ever changed. I think we became friends when we were like 2. I don't know. Like our moms were friends at church. But we went to the same middle school, the same high school, and the same college. And we danced at the same studio. But none of those people really knew, like no one really at dance and no one really at school knew that we were friends because we just existed. We had such different friend groups, and we just, like, in sort of our day-to-day, the people that we're drawn to are so different. I think in college we finally had some shared friends, but like our core friend groups were still quite different. It's so funny. We talk about each other like we've sort of been like, yeah, we're really more like sisters than like friends. We disagree about so many things, and we're such different people. But it's like, I just know you're in my life forever. Like, you can't leave. I can't leave your life, you can't leave my life. That's just it. That's just what's happening. And it's such a bizarre thing where, like, there's so many people that I know about from her that I have never spoken to. And same thing, I think, through me. There are certain things that she knows about me just by existing in the same space as me for so long that, like, I don't even think to communicate to people. Like, she was the first one to figure out that I, like, am a chronic eavesdropper. I would, you know, like, in public spaces, I'm nosy. And she was the first one to be like, you're listening to their conversation, aren't you? And I was like, shh. Quiet. And, like, yeah, stuff like that. There's just things she knows. And, you know, I have several other examples of people I befriended slightly later where I look at our personalities and I look at our lifestyles now, and I'm like, if we met, I don't know, I don't even think we would meet, because we would never be doing the same activities to begin with. But hypothetically, if we did meet for some reason, I don't know. On the surface, I don't think we would assume that the other person would be interested in being friends with us. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. There's those things on the surface when you're more of a fully formed person, where you're like, oh, well, you run in those circles, or you dress like this, or you listen to that music, and so you affiliate yourself with this system or belief or whatever, and so I just assume that you would not be down for whatever's going on inside my head.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're young, you're not fully formed yet.
And similar to, like, Ro and Yoonhee, like, they become friends because they're both in the same Sunday school, and Ro likes her scrunchie, and Yoonhee brings a scrunchie for Ro the next week. Like, friendship sealed. Like, as a kid, it's just, like, so much of just, like, I happen to be in the same space. Like, I don't even think about, like, would this person make a good friend? But, like, yeah, we're making, like, conscious and unconscious choices as a child. Like, there's definitely, I remember I started at a new school in second grade, and even in second grade, we'd all been in school for all of, like, 2 or 3 years. I felt everyone's so far ahead. They already have their friends. Like, how am I going to make friends here? And just, like, hit it off with someone who, like, let me play Foursquare with them. And then she was my best friend for 6 years, and we still, like, stay in touch. And it's just, like, like, I don't know what drew us to meet, you know, besides the fact that we were sitting in the same classroom and played at recess together. But I think we would have, like, a cheerful conversation if we met as strangers, like, oh, your kids are cute, and, like, where are you from? Like, I don't think I would dislike her, but, like, I think also because I moved so much, like, I'm not gonna run into some people that I've known my whole life, except for the fact that we once lived in the same town. There's certain people in your life that, like, are always going to be there, and maybe other people don't understand, and maybe you don't even understand, like, the depths of, like, why that person matters, but they just do.
Well, yeah, it makes me think about, like, how hard it is to make friends these days, how hard it is to make friends as an adult, and all of the ways that we try to connect with people through compatibility. And yet, like, some of the longest lasting relationships in our lives are people we were just in proximity with at a certain point in time, and now they're just there forever. and it, like, there's no formula, there's no, like, we want to connect with people so much, and you can with people who are very different from you. Part of what this novel does really well, I think, is emphasize your life is full of connections, even if they feel messy, or even if they feel like I would never have chosen you today as an adult, you know, even if you feel very isolated because they're so different from you, or whatever it may be, like, Ro is not as alone as she thinks she is. And I feel like that's one of the big themes of the novel, is like her genuine loneliness, right? Where I don't want to discredit that. And also how maybe her life is more connected than she thinks. A lot of that loneliness comes from change. So like with the octopus as sort of the centerpiece of this loneliness, right? Dolores the octopus has been transported to an aquarium. She didn't ask for that. She's very isolated. She's probably too big for her enclosure. You see a lot of themes, like, it's kind of impossible to detangle change from loneliness in this book, because a lot of the loneliness is caused by change. When we get the flashback sort of talking about Ro's mother, we see a bit of the isolation of the change of moving to another country, the immigrant experience. You know, where on the one hand, Ro did not ask to be born where she was. She didn't ask her parents to move for her. But also, she, you know, her mother did deal with an incredibly isolating experience. Like, very soon after they moved to the States, her mom was, like, just starting to get connected into a community and just starting to find a sense of purpose in her work. And that's when she got pregnant. And it completely, like, cuts her off from building any kind of community. She's, like, so isolated. And she finally finds some kind of community and connection through church in a way that Ro's father never really understands, because he has such a strong sense of purpose with his work.
We get glimpses of this in Ro's relationships too, right? So Yoonhee is going through a big change in her life, like getting engaged, planning a wedding. When we have this kind of reconciliation conversation at the end, when they finally talk to each other about it, Yoonhee's feeling like isolated in the change. So she's feeling lonely, like her friend who's always been there through every big thing in life and every small thing is suddenly not there for her. And she's really lonely as she's planning things, where her fiance is like loving and caring, but like does not care about the details in the way she does. And so Yoonhee's like lonely while she's going through a big life change. And same with Rachel. I think Rachel seems a little bit more grounded, and like she does rely on other people. Like she definitely relies on Ro, even when Ro is a bit unreliable, and reaches out to other people. But like she misses her ex-husband or her separated husband, even though he was abusive. She's like, I miss him. Like, we had 10 years together. Like, he was just this like cornerstone of my lived experience for a decade. Like, I can't just get away for, like, give that all away. And that seems really difficult for her to kind of manage that loneliness of, she's not really ever alone because she's got a 5-year-old and like works a job and has a lot going on, but that loneliness of going through that experience with others around her. And Rachel and Ro talk about like divorce is not a thing in their family and in their Korean American community. Like, it was really shocking. And so she doesn't even have other people who relate to her experience in her like immediate circle. And so we have Ro going through a lot of loneliness too. Oh, you pulled this quote. I forgot how good it is. But I think the end of chapter 7 or so, Ro's taking a shower after forgetting she was supposed to watch a 5-year-old for the day and then spending the day with the 5-year-old.
While hungover.
And hearing from Rachel kind of like the struggle of trying to let go of her marriage. Ro says, I watched the water circle the drain, thinking about all the ways you can go crazy from loneliness or pain, the things you'll do or settle for when you get desperate enough.
One of the most haunting sort of connecting points in the book is the story of Dolphin.
Oh my gosh, the dolphin.
Who gets... There's like a zoo or aquarium that gets abandoned because of a natural disaster.
Something along those lines. Yeah, basically an aquarium in Japan that doesn't have the funding or the resources anymore, and so they kind of shut down, but they weren't able to rehome all of the sea creatures.
And so there's this dolphin who's in isolation and is kind of losing her mind and like pacing her cage in circles. And people do this big GoFundMe to like get her to a new home and get her cared for. But even after she's moved, and they're successful, and it's really exciting, but even after this dolphin has moved, she never fully recovers. She just like continues this pattern of circling her enclosure over and over and over again, because she can never fully trust that she won't be left alone again.
Yeah, it's so sad.
It's so upsetting. It's so upsetting. You get the feeling with Dolores, too, that, like, because Dolores is so big. Like, this is probably not the environment she's meant to be in. Like, there is Ro has a moment where she's like, honestly, this rich guy could probably give her a big enough cage that might be more suitable to her than what she has here in the aquarium. So we see through these sort of external examples that Ro is contemplating, like, how desperate people will be, how desperately people will cling on to the past of desperately trying not to be alone. What Ro kind of has to learn is that, like, in order for her to not be alone, she actually needs to continue changing. And she needs to, embrace the change. As isolating as the process feels, holding on to the past is just going to make that distance more prominent. It's just going to make it worse. Something you pointed out, I think part of what the author does really well in helping us understand this journey for her is the fact that the author drops us into kind of the middle of Ro's, like, isolation.
Yeah, and it's almost like after what could be the inciting incident has already happened, which is Tay leaving to go to the Mars training. We catch up, like, we get dropped in, like, weeks after. You know, she's post-breakup. We're at a point where people have kind of gone back to acting the way they normally do. You know, like, when someone's going through a really hard time, the instinct is to, like, check in with them and to see them. And, like, eventually that, like, slows down from the support system unless it's very intentionally, like, requested and maintained. And so she's in this lonely limbo after he's left for the training, but he hasn't left the planet yet. So they've officially broken up, but she's having a hard time accepting it in the same way that we learn, you know, like, her dad has died and she's had a very hard time accepting that he's gone. And so we kind of meet her at a really pessimistic and low point. And since it's all from her point of view, we kind of don't like anyone around her. We're like, but as we get these flashbacks, we kind of understand more of, like, her relationships and, like, how nuanced everyone is. And her boyfriend didn't just, like, leave her, you know, in a way he was feeling pulled towards a greater purpose, but also they had troubles in their relationship and he had reasons to be frustrated with her and to not feel that she was taking care of herself and, like, you know, respecting some of his boundaries and stuff like that. So,
and also she, instead of, like, letting the relationship end, she just, like, disappears. Like, she's technically the one who leaves.
He says, like, I'm going, and they have kind of a goodbye, but not really. And then she just, like, leaves in the morning before he wakes up.
Because she doesn't want to deal with the actual change of it. We're more on her side because these things all seem new for us. Like, we've just learned that her boyfriend's going to Mars. You know, everyone else in her life has known this for a long time. So we're like, yeah, why are you treating her like this? This is crazy. Why is he going to Mars? And I think it all kind of comes back to, like, her isolation is because she is pulling back. She is withdrawing from these relationships that are complicated. They're not perfect, right? These are not perfect relationships. But she is decidedly withdrawing. She's the one leaving first. She's the one getting out before they hurt her, because it all sort of comes back to her relationship with her dad. I think the reason that the inciting incident is the octopus being sold, potentially, and not her boyfriend going to Mars, is because the big decision for her at the end of the novel is to quit her job and separate herself from the octopus. Like, in order for her to grow, she has to let go of the last thing she has of her father. Because once she lets Dolores go, that's it. He's officially dead. Their relationship is officially over. She can't talk to him. It's done. And she has to move on with her life. Towards the end of the novel, we get her finally coming to terms with this idea, right? So she says, even though Appa is gone, Dolores is here, and so am I. And later on in the chapter, in the end, I know no amount of wishful thinking can ever bring him back. But in the meantime, there is still so much of the world to see and hold on to care for and care about, to love in spite of.
Yeah, and it's like, hearing that last line, like, there's so much to see and hold on to care for and care about, to love in spite of. in a way is also closure with Tay leaving, right? Because she did not understand why he'd want to leave, because she didn't want to leave. And I think this story is not really sci-fi because we're not just like hanging out on the Mars mission the whole time, but it's the story of who's left behind, you know? Like, we have so many stories of people who leave the planet to discover something else and, you know, save humanity through different means. But what are the stories of the immediate after? You know, who's left behind and what do they think about it? So I think it's really beautiful that we got to spend a novel with Ro and Dolores and kind of watch and witness Ro find closure with so many elements of her life that maybe we're left, you know, not with a beautiful goodbye, but in just abrupt endings, but finding closure on her own that her father will never know about and Tay will never know about, but the change matters to her. And so that's what I find so hopeful at the end is like the renewed friendships, the openness to connecting with her mom, but also mostly the sense of creating closure for herself.
And the realization that change it's very scary and lonely and unknown, but it's also the thing that's necessary in order to make her less alone. She needs to make changes in the relationships that she does have in order for them to continue, in order to be connected with them. I feel like that is best emphasized to return us back to the octopus in the end, as the novel also does. These are the final lines of the novel. Quit her job. It's a little bit in the future. She's brought her cousin's daughter to the aquarium to see Dolores, and they have this sort of final goodbye. And it says, Dolores spangles gold. Then, when she's ready, she gently lets go, and something inside me loosens too. She sinks back into the water, as bright and burnished as a falling star. Dolores is gonna be okay. She's doing what she was always meant to do. She's adapting, and Ro is gonna be okay too. Based on your experience of the novel, what would you recommend people read next?
Okay, so there's a nonfiction book called Big Friendship by Amina Chowsoy and Anne Friedman. They are two podcasters. They had a podcast together for about 8 years. It was a big hit called Call Your Girlfriend. And this is their reflection on what they call big friendship, how we keep each other close. And their story kind of starts when, as friends, they end up in like relationship therapy to mend their friendship. And their therapist is kind of like, I don't ever see friends come in. And they're like, why not? Like, this is one of the most significant relationships of our lives. And it's not working right now. And we want to save it. And we want to fix it. So it's them sharing some of their own experiences, but also just pulling together a lot of writings and philosophies and thoughts about friendship. It's a really good read. For more book about a woman who's dealing with shit, but also trying to change and depressed. Before the Ruins by Victoria Gosling, I've recommended before, but similar vibes. I had to read that one in chunks because the emotional impact. And I'll recommend, because it's coming up soon here in the pod, Woman Eating by Claire Coda. Similar, very introspective look at a very individual person in a short time frame, but carries an emotional punch with a heavier dose of the fantastical than we get in Sea Change.
I would just reiterate the books I mentioned earlier, How Far the Light Reaches by Sabrina Imbler and World of Wonders by Amy Nezukumatatil. Okay, and then we haven't done this in a minute.
It's been a very long, hot minute.
It's been a very, very long, you might say a cool minute. It's no longer hot. What are you currently obsessed with? I think we are sharing a lot of currently
I
obsessed.
wrote mine down first, so they're mine.
I know, and I'm very jealous.
Okay, Jacob Collier, Jesse Volume 4. It's on repeat. Julie and I are going to the concert. And
yes!
Hit us up on Instagram to hear how it went. I cannot wait. Rude and I were watching all the music videos the other night. And, like, could the Jesse collection get better? No. Like, it's a beautiful ending to a 4-album cycle. If you want to learn more, I would really highly recommend the Switched on Pop episode. They interview Jacob Collier, Beyonce's Cowboy Carter. If you're not listening, what are you doing? So good. Switched on Pop also has a good reaction episode to this. They put it out like 12 hours after the album came out. So it's just their reactions. They didn't do an interview for this one yet. So good. So good. Such a good album. I just oscillate between the two albums when I'm working.
Yeah, my cousin and I, because I was in the South this weekend. And so we spent a good chunk of our time. Anytime we were in the car, we were singing at the top of our lungs to Two Most Wanted with Beyonce and Miley Cyrus, doing those little harmonies.
Oh, that's adorable.
In addition to Jacob Collier and Beyonce, also Conan Gray has a new album that's literally like a modern 80s pop album. Like, you can hear the influences. It's not a direct copy, but like he has this song called Boys and Girls, and it's very clearly like a riff on Girls on Film. He has one that sounds like 80s Elton John.
I was gonna say the album looks like David Bowie, like the album cover, the way he's dressed.
Like the way he sings is he does that like night, like the like weird broad sound that they did in the 80s, and like on a technical level it's so cool. And then I'm finally getting on the Chapel Roan train. It has taken me a while, but the song Good Luck Babe has gotten me into it. And that song, let me tell you, that's only for The Sopranos. It's Victoria will not be able to sing it. So you'll get to harmonize. You can sing all of Beyonce's album, or most of it. Anyway,
yeah.
Should we say what the next episode is going to be, or leave it a surprise?
We'll leave it a surprise in case we decide to reorder our episodes.
Sounds great.
Join us next time where we talk about more vampires and more octopuses. Or we talk about a vampire or a octopus. What? I can't talk.
More vampires and octopedes coming to a theater near you.
Catch you next time and happy reading.
Bye, everybody.
This has been an episode of The Vampire and the Octopus, a special series from Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Thanks for listening, and thank you to our members who keep the show going. You can support the show and also receive access to exclusive bonus content, including our film club, newsletters, and archive of the first 50 episodes of the show at buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, and Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Thubland. We want to know what you're reading and your bookish thoughts, so you can reach us at our website, bookclubwithjv.com, on Instagram at bookclubwithjv, or by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify. We'll catch you next time. Happy reading.